minute now. Okay, and we're recording. So just a quick reminder of where we are on the roadmap. We are coming into the tail end of miscellaneous concepts before we start doing overviews of SAML, OAuth, and OpenID. And then the fun really begins when we're really going to get hands-on and start getting down and dirty with SSO and OAuth flows and communities. And then we'll see what's left over after that. But so far, we're still on kind of those one-off concepts that are posted in the study guide. Our presenters today, the original person that was going to do Quizmaster was not able to continue with the group, so I'm going to be doing our licenses Quizmaster today, and then we'll have Amit, and then Paulina and Brenda. Thank you for your flexibility. I know we carried the session security topics over from Monday, so looking forward to getting those presentations from you. So without further ado, let me bring up the Quizmaster and put it in share in. That's not what I want to do. Oh, sorry. My display settings are, here we go. Let's try that. That's better. Okay. So question number 1, how does an external identity license differ from a community license? And I'm just going to pick on random people to answer these questions. So Edith, what do you think? What are the differences between an external identity license and a community license?
Oh, I would say that some of it has to do with the type of information that they can see in Salesforce. They just can access not all of the objects, maybe. Sorry, I wasn't here on Wednesday.
Yeah, no, that's actually the exact answer. Is you can add them to the community just like with a community user license, but they do have access to fewer objects. And a couple of the next quiz slides will talk about what those objects are. Clara, be warned, you're next. Jeff, your mic is off. Did you have something to add?
Nope, I was just getting ready in case I was ready to answer one.
All right, Clara, you're next up for the next question, so I'll give folks a little bit of warning now. All right, what standard objects can a user with an external identity license access? What do you think, Clara?
They can access, of course, their account and contacts that are related. They can access cases.
Well, you're 2 out of 3, you're right on. So they can access accounts, contacts, assets, and files.
Okay.
One thing is there's a great explanation of the difference between external identity and community user licenses. This feature came out in, I think, 2015. I can't remember if it was winter 2015, but the release notes are a little bit outdated as far as number of objects, so keep that in mind. Let's see. Amit, you're going to be, no, you're presenting today. We'll be nice to you. Okay, Svadka, you are up for the next quiz slide. How many custom objects can a user with an external identity license access?
Well, community is 10, although that number is actually kind of lucid. Didn't you just say 3 or 4 were custom standard, like in a previous question?
Yeah, some were standard. So these are specifically dealing with custom objects. So you said 10?
Yeah, I would go for 10.
All right, let's go with 10. See what we got. Come on, that's right, 10. And if the custom objects are in a managed package, they don't count toward the limits. So you kind of get those custom objects for free, so to speak. Okay, let's see. John Daniel, you're next. Welcome to the party. Of course, features are available to external identity users. So this is not like standard objects, but other features that come with Salesforce. What do you think? What can external identity users access? Is John muted? John is muted. I wonder if he's having mic issues. We had mic issues last time.
No, no, I'm back now.
Oh, good.
I was muted at several places, but that's a whole different story. To be honest, I actually don't know the answer to this particular question, but I don't know. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's totally fair. Okay, the answers are they can access Chatter, because where would we be without Chatter? It's like everybody gets access to Chatter no matter what your license, it seems like. Identity, which is the whole point of having an external identity user, is so that you can use those identity features. And if the admin has enabled it, they do have self-registration available to them. And let's see, Pavitra, you're up next. And if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, please correct me. So what is the difference between identity and external identity licenses?
I haven't really studied on this, so I really don't know.
Okay, well, take a guess. What do you think that might be the difference?
I feel identity is more like the licenses for. Is it something like for both the Salesforce users, and then from an identity perspective? No idea.
Well, you're kind of on the right path. You're actually really close.
Okay.
So yeah, external identity is for external users. So customers, partners, basically the kind of people you would give a community license to. If it makes more sense, you give them an external identity license instead because it's cheaper if they don't need access to some of the other features. And then identity licenses designed for internal use. Let's see, who do we get to pick on next? Terry Miller, I'm going to pick on you next. And thank you for making these awesome slides, because as you can see, I copied your template and I'm using it. So what is the purpose of an identity license?
I would say, I'm sorry, I'm traveling at the moment, so if there's noise, that's why. Identity allows us to leverage Salesforce as the IDP to access other systems.
That's right. So how is that different from a regular Salesforce license?
You don't have access to your other objects in Salesforce. It basically gives you app launcher.
Yeah, that's right. It's exactly right. So basically, if you want to use Salesforce as your source of record for your users for for authentication, but you don't want to pay the hefty fee to give them a full Salesforce license, you can buy an identity license. And that way the admin can still manage all company users through Salesforce, and only the people that actually have to be in Salesforce get the full expensive Salesforce licenses, and the other ones can have the lower cost identity licenses. What's next? All right, so this is an exam question, and I'm going to open this one up to the whole group for discussion. So Widget World needs/wants, you can tell I was typing this late at night, to give limited read-write access to accounts and contacts to its customers. Which licenses would be best suited for this? Choose 2 answers. And who wants to jump in and say which ones they think are or are not the correct ones? And if nobody jumps in, I'm just going to start picking people.
It was B and D, right?
Okay. Anybody else have any other thoughts? Ding, 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 you are correct. B and D. So yeah, because the keyword here is customers, because I can give my internal users access with the Service Cloud or Sales Cloud license, but because the exam question specifically said customers, we're looking at external types. And this is the kind of thing that exams will get you on, is you look for that keyword of what's going to make the difference on the right answer. And last question. So access to which objects or features is available with community licenses, but not with external identity licenses?
C. And A.
Ding, 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 ding. That is exactly right. Okay, that's all I have. And so we will go to, let me bring up my other slide.
So real quick, just a discussion point.
Okay.
So the basic identity is basically just for that. Internal users get identity, nothing else. But it sounds like then external identity, they've extended the ability to see some objects.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, I guess it's a misnomer, because they're not really internal and external just for identity, because you get extra stuff with the external identity that you don't get with internal.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's what was confusing me, because when I started reading about external identity, I went, well, this sounds a lot like a community license.
Exactly. In fact, I was just looking it up to try and see, and they tie it with communities. Again, that confusing point where multiple things to get to the same answer.
Right. the big takeaway I got on external identity was the fact that it basically lets them self-manage their contact information is how I like to think about it. So they can update their address, they can update their phone number, but they can't open a case for customer support. So that's a big reason to use a community license instead, is if you want them to have self-service options, like open a trouble ticket, then they need that full community license. Good point, Jeff. And yeah, that was definitely a point of confusion for me as well. Okay, Amit, or maybe it's Amit, please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong. You are up with identity providers and service providers. I'm going to stop presenting and you can go ahead and present. And Amit, you're muted. So if you're speaking, oh, there you go. Okay, here comes your screen and your mic mute is off. Good.
Okay. Sorry, I was on mute earlier. Hey, Natalya. Good morning.
Good morning. So is it Amit or Amit?
It's Amit.
Okay, so Amit. Stress
Yeah,
on the
that's
second
right.
syllable? Okay.
Yeah. Hi, all. I had prepared these slides based on what I was assigned, trying to see how best I can give you tough questions on identity provider and service providers. Let me get started. So, Natalya, like, do I need to pick someone, or will people be answering it once I post the question?
You know what? I'll pick on somebody on your behalf. So
That would help.
Paulina is
Yeah.
going to be first.
So
Quizmaster is equal opportunity, putting everybody on the spot. So be prepared, folks.
So an identity provider is
Identity provider, it's where it's a I'm okay. Let me pause for a moment and compose my answer. This is where the authentication or authorization happens, where this is the application which says, like, okay, where the identity resides, or like this is where authentication happens.
yes, you're right. So it is basically a trusted provider, like how it, like if you are using Salesforce with single sign-on, your Microsoft AD is an identity provider, wherein once you log into your laptop with your Microsoft AD and you open your custom my domain, then the Microsoft AD becomes your identity provider and you are able to log into Salesforce. Thanks.
Okay. No, we already picked on John Daniel. Satish, you're answering the next question.
Hey Satish, what is a service provider?
Service provider is the one that provides you the functionality. In this case, Salesforce, Salesforce Cloud, is a service provider.
Yes, it is basically something that gives you access to apps. So yes, Salesforce here is service provider, as you rightly said, wherein once we try to hit on the Salesforce website, it goes back to Microsoft AD to verify the credentials, and if it is verified, we can log into Salesforce using Microsoft's AD's identity provider.
Very cool. Clara, you're answering the next question. If it's a quiz, and if it's an exam type, then we'll open it up for the floor.
I don't think I have prepared anything exam type. I have all.
Oh, okay, they're all quiz. Perfect. All right, Clara, you're up next.
How do you configure inbound single sign-on with a third-party identity provider?
Oh, sorry, Clara.
that's a question. So I'm going to assume that you're going to configure it from Salesforce. So the first thing is, of course, you have to enable my domain. Then you have to enable social sign-on, and then configure both parties. So you have to kind of present Salesforce to your third-party identity provider, and maybe here you might or may not want to use a federal what's the actual technical name?
Federation ID.
The federation ID. And you want to present, right? Kind of do a handshake. Hey, this is Salesforce, and Salesforce is going to be asking you about information about from some clients, and then on your service provider or the actual app that is going to ask for authentication, you also want to introduce the third-party identity provider there. So that's kind of the general steps.
Yeah, you did answer most of it. Basically, just to recap, we create a federation ID, and then we set up SSO first on Salesforce if Salesforce is the um, service provider, and then also set up the same thing on the other provider with the identity provider. This SSO, the settings on the Salesforce settings from to on the SSO provider. And the main things that we are usually looking for is something like the issuer ID, the endpoint URL, the entity URL, which we get on the Salesforce side if Salesforce is the um, the service provider, and then we just need to test it by using a dummy user to see that it all works. So yeah, great answer. Thanks.
Yeah, I love that last point. Make sure it works, because setting it up isn't enough if it doesn't work. And there's some good content coming later on how do you troubleshoot SSO, so we'll all have lots of fun with that.
Yes, there is a one log, right, which we can track on at least on Salesforce to see the exceptions that for a particular user on SSO.
Okay. Winnie, you're answering the next question, and after Winnie, it's going to be David.
What are the benefits of a single sign-on?
Winnie, reach for that mute button and unmute yourself. Okay, your mic is on, but we can't hear you talking.
I'll answer this one then.
All right.
If you want. One of the benefits of Active Directory single sign-on, it's integrated with the Microsoft environment.
Yes. So basically, it is less maintenance for admins. It is easy for there are no data leaks, and yes, there are no passwords to remember. As you rightly said, that we are connected with our Microsoft AD.
Yep, and another big benefit that somebody mentioned, I think it was Svatka maybe, on a previous presentation, is when a user leaves, you only have to remove them in one place. And they're
Yes, that's the first one. Yeah, it saves time provisioning and deactivating users.
You just said it a different way. Okay.
Yeah.
Winnie, is your microphone any better? Try unmuting again, Winnie. Let's see. Okay, Winnie's having issues. All right. Let's see. Jeff, we haven't heard from you for a while.
So, Jeff, what Salesforce features must you have my domain enabled for?
Excuse me, it has to be initially enabled if you're going to do single sign-on.
Yeah.
Communities use a different form of the my domain.
Subdomain.
Correct. I think sites also uses then the subdomain from communities, or I know there's one associated with sites. I don't remember if it's separate from the communities or not. And that's all I can think of.
There's also Lightning components if you want to use custom Lightning components.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. A single sign-on, then social sign-on also we need this, and Lightning components, as Natalya pointed out.
Okay, Winnie, let's see if you're having any better luck now that you're back in. Done. Got off the hook. All right. Thank you, Amit. All right. Paulina, tell us about session security.
Okay, let me share here first. don't think I can share it.
We had it for a second and then it ran away.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I'm like sharing from a. Okay, let's see if now. Let me do the entire screen better.
It's coming. It's coming. Yes, it's here. All right.
So I'm going to be talking about session security. It's a lot of settings. So it was not like an easy way to put it, at least something that was a little bit fun. So be advised, it's not a very easy kind of topic because it's a lot of settings. And I think what you are going to do is, as you start setting up or doing single sign-on or doing exercises, you're going to start using each of these settings. So I don't think you need to learn all of them by heart, but I'm going to go through most of them, and we will see. So I'll go through what is the user session, the different settings, and then I'm going to focus on settings for specific areas and how you can monitor the user sessions. So let's see. So user session is when there's a login, there's a established session between the user and the platform. It could be also between systems when you use APIs, but it's really after you have been authenticated and authorized, then the session starts. And the idea of this session security is to make sure you have a system that is secure. So it limits how you are exposure to the network, and it limits any internal or external attacks, depending on how much of this, how you use these settings. It is important to remember that just closing the browser doesn't close the session. So it's important to teach all your users that they need to explicitly log out, or else the session will keep running in the system. By default, Salesforce uses transport layer security, and it requires HTTPS connections. So, but you can modify all these. So I'm going to go through each of the settings, and we will see. So there are tons of settings. I think I have 3 or 4 slides for settings. And as I said before, the important thing here is this will do, it will protect you from external or internal attacks. I will recommend when you have your system, go and run the optimizer. It will let you know how safe is your current implementation. It will give you like a percentage of how secure it is. It might be telling you 60% is, you have a lot of vulnerability, or you are safe. So it's really good to take a look at that. So all these settings are in one page when you do the setup. And in the next presentation, they will show you how to do this. But they are grouped by different sessions, different areas. So the first area is session timeout. And instead of reading or explain you every single of these ones, I'm going to go through some of them because or else we will be here the whole morning, okay? So timeout. Under timeout, you have 2 different settings. Timeout value is really after how many minutes of no activity the system is going to log you out. And you can do it between 10 minutes and 24 hours. So that's the one. The next one is if you want the system to warn you that you are about to be logged out, you can enable that pop-up window for you or not. Okay. Let's go to the next one. So session settings for logout on session timeout. So what happens is if you select this one, you click on that flag. It means that after you are logged out, next time you try to go, it's going to ask you to put again your login and password. So it depends on how you have your system, but you might recall in some orgs, maybe you close your browser, you come back, and just by putting the URL, you just are logging into the system, but there are other ones when you are forced to log in. It depends on these settings here. This one is gonna log the users to log in if they come from a specific IP address. And this one, the session domain, is gonna make sure if you log in through a some domain, it's not going to allow you to use the same kind of authentication from another domain. So what it means is if you, let's say, if you are logging from one community site, you cannot use that to log through another way, let's say to Sales Cloud, or let's say you're using partner community, then you cannot use the same for let's say the customer community, because your session is associated with that particular domain. So as you see, it's a lot of stuff here. So there are some that are kind of, by just reading the setting, is kind of easy to understand, because you say here, like this one requires HTTPS connection. If it is flagged, then you have to have that, you have to put that in the URL to be able to go to the system. This one, for example, the last one, if you are logging as a user, let's say you're testing as an admin the different profiles, and then you decide to log as a service rep, then as a sales rep, then as an executive. When you log out, you might be forced to log in again, depending on how you set up this flag. So if you check it, then every time you log in as a user and then log out, you're going to be forced to log in again with your credentials. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple of things here. I'm going to start skipping some. This one, for example, use post requests for cross-domain session. This one, what happens is if you do only get instead of post, what happens is not as secure, because post is requiring you to get the answer from the other system. This one, as you know, Internet Explorer 11 is not really recommended to use in Lightning experience, but some customers are still using it, and they are paying for external for extended use. So if you want still to use Internet Explorer 11, then you have to check this, that you agree it's your responsibility. So you cannot, it's not Salesforce responsibility, it's yours. Okay, so let's go through, so there's a lot of them here. So I'm just going through my notes, trying to skip some of these. And I want, Natalia, if you could please let me know half of the way when I should stop, so I can go through the other ones, because there's so many settings here. Let's go to the last one here, like enable connection delivery, the CDN. So what happens is, if you are using a content delivery network like Akamai, the system is going to perform faster. So if you want to use that one here, you need to check the flag. So you might be using your resources internally. You put your, let's say, your logos and figures and all that in Salesforce. It's going to be slower than using the CDN. But if you want to use the CDN, you check this one. And this is really recommended if you are using, let's say, some of the communities like CloudCraze, or some of those where you put a lot of images. So in CloudCraze or the B2B community, usually you have all your products, the pictures of the products, the specifications, a lot of information, and you put that usually in the content in your system. So it's better in those cases to use the CDN. So this is the flag for that.
Yeah. Can you go back to that previous slide for a second, Paulina? One setting that I love to use, and it drove me nuts until I discovered this setting. If you're working in Lightning, you may have noticed that when you do something new, like a new process builder, or you add a field, and then you go to look at the page you just added it to, it doesn't show up. And 10 minutes later, suddenly the field is there. The thing that makes that field instantly appear is to turn off that second option under caching, enable secure and persistent browser caching. If you uncheck that checkbox when you're working in Lightning, all your changes show up right away. So yeah, if you have that 10-minute delay, this is how to get rid of it.
Yeah, that's true. So either you do that, or you have to refresh every time you finish doing your settings to be able to see it. Close your browser and refresh. Yes, it's annoying.
Yeah, and even with refreshes, I've had it where it doesn't come up right away. So I just keep that checkbox unchecked when I'm in deep customization mode, and then just remember to turn it back on for your users so they get better performance after you're done. Carry on.
Okay, so here we have a lot of other settings.
Oh my gosh.
What I was explaining is not like a very fun topic to talk because it's a lot of just checkbox that you can select, and I guess you will learn them as needed. You don't need to learn all of them by heart, but when you're gonna set up, I don't know, some of your securities for yourself, then you will find out what is exactly what you need. So here, this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about this one of identity verifications, because at the beginning, I think, Natalie, you were one of the ones who were trying to understand or ask the question, what was the difference between using the two-factor authentication and the identity verification? I don't recall who asked that.
Yep, that was me.
But in the two-factor authentication, what happens is every time you log in, you have to put your, approve that in your phone, or whatever type of second authentication method you are using, either with Google Authentication or Salesforce, whatever it is. But this identity verification doesn't happen all the time. It happens sometimes when you want the system to verify that you are really who you said you are. So when you, for example, enable this flag, the SMS method, what happens is the users will receive a one-time kind of password delivered via SMS. So like 5-digit number or something. So when they log in, they will get that in their phone. They have to put the 5-digit there, and then you can continue working. And it doesn't happen all the times. It happens, sometimes it's just verifying that you are the one that you said you are. So let me try to see which one's here. Like if you're gonna use two-factor authentication, then you're gonna have to check this one here. This one for the email address. Let me see. I remember I have an issue with this one. Yeah. So before you change the email address of a person, it's gonna ask the user to verify they are the person who, they are saying they are, before you can change the email address for that. You might get into trouble. Let's say you have a sandbox org, and then you want to change the address for something that is weird. So your real users are not getting the emails, and then you start getting trouble because it's asking the user to first verify the email. It's that flag. So you need to first unflag that, so you don't get like in that trouble. But also when you are working on the user, if you drill down in the user and the setup users, if you don't want to do that, at the very end there's a flag that says something like change password immediately. I don't recall the name of that flag. But if you get into that kind of log that you cannot change the email because you need the user and you forgot what is this flag, at the very end of the setup user, when you are editing the user, you select the last flag and it will release you from that issue. So I'm trying to go through the ones that are I think you will be using more. So these ones are all I haven't used these ones personally, but I have here the definitions. Let me see which one of the ones that you might want to see. Okay, so let's do this click jack protection. Enable clickjack protection for setup pages. So this one, what it does is protect clickjack attacks on your Salesforce pages. So really, those are known as interface redress attack. I really haven't never used that one, so I'm not really very familiar with those. But these two are more to protect your Salesforce pages. So, and I'm sorry, I don't have any experience on those, so I cannot give you good examples on that. The second one, these ones are more around your Visual 4 pages. So anybody who's working with Visual 4 pages, Apex and all that, you probably are using these ones. I'm not familiar with those. So I can read you exactly the definition, but I don't think I will be helping you much. And I don't think these ones are the ones that you are going to be more focused on the exercises to do single sign-on or, put in your SAML tokens or for communities. So hopefully, if somebody have questions here, there's somebody else who can help us here on answer, use cases for these ones. But in the Salesforce help, you have the specific definition for each of these topics. Let me see which one.
So could you talk about high assurance sessions and what is high assurance all about?
Those are the ones that I'm going to be talking later on. So in here, I just wanted to mention, I think the ones that I'm going to focus later on are the ones that you probably are going to be asked for. So so here are so many other ones. So let's try to focus on what we need to really focus for this one. So first of all, let's go to the main ones that I think is the ones that we need to focus on. So first of all, there are different security levels in Salesforce. One is the standard and one is the high assurance. So you were asking about that. And it depends on how you authenticate. So the important thing is you define if it is a standard or high assurance by defining some policies. But the way you need to remember is high assurance is where you restrict access to specific operations. So, for example, if you want to change some of the single sign-on settings or specific areas of security, you might want to set up that high assurance policy. So if you have 10 different admins in your system, maybe you want only 3 of them to be able to modify those security settings. Okay, so high assurance is for specific areas of the setup that you want only specific admins to do that, not all the admins. So I'm gonna go through those in the next slide. But like setting up username, password, delegated authentication, and all these things are for standard. Any admin that you give the admin role will be able to do that. But for example, if you want to have two-factor authentication, you can say only these ones will be having that access to. So let's go here. So is this kind of a little bit clear? I'll go through I believe in 2 more slides, you'll see it more in more detail. So some of the areas where you will probably get questions is in browser security settings, because those are more like, I think those are more used in general and the ones that you probably are going to be practicing during the exercises. So you have this one, the Referral URL Protection. So it's gonna when you are coming or navigating from any place outside Salesforce, and then it's gonna show you only Salesforce.com instead of the whole URL. This is for protection. So it's not gonna show you your entire domain. It's gonna just show the kind of general domain Salesforce.com or Force.com. So this is really a protection. When you are using single sign-on, the SSL security tokens, Salesforce, if you enable this, Salesforce is going to be kind of checking randomly that the certificate is not affected. So this is like a very good setting to make sure you are protected from external hackers. So HTTP transportation and protection. So it always redirects from you to the security URL using HTTPS. If you are using that, you have always to use your domain. You cannot go through, So if you go, let's say you're using Sandbox, or if you look at the URLs on top, initially you might be using the URL that doesn't have the domain. Maybe you start from Classic, for example, and then you change to Lightning. The URL on top is gonna change. But if you are using this HTTPS protection, it's always gonna ask you to use the specific, explicitly the domain that you have set up in your system. This is one that you probably you're gonna have a questions probably on this area, and this is the ranges of IP addresses that a user can log in. So you can define from this address to this address, only allow the access, and you can have multiple sets of IP ranges. So this is something that you're gonna have by sharing your questions that you can have like 10 different API branches, and those are the ones that are gonna allow you to have access to the system. So if you have, for example, different regions or areas within your company, and you have different sets of IP addresses, then this is where you protect it. You don't want people outside your system to contact the system, to be able to log in into the system. This is by sure one of the questions that you will get. There are settings where and this is under setup identity verification. Sorry, I wanted to say here. So in this slide, I put here where you can do that, even though in the show and tell you will get that, but setup network access is where you can get the IP address ranges. If you go to setup identity verification, here is where you can decide when you want the users to be prompted to verify the identity. So here is what you can enable here, for example, the SMS method that I explained before, or when you want to have the two-factor authentication. So all these are grouped in the area that is identity verification. The other ones are under the session. So, so here is those, and the identity is only at specific times, except for two-factor is every time that you get it. Now here, let's talk a little bit more about the high assurance sessions versus the standard. So when I was saying standard is any admin can do that unless you have the policy to set up for high assurance. So these are the ones on the bottom. I put here the screenshot from the setup, are the areas where you can say, for these particular areas, I only want to have specific users to have access to it. And in most of these, like report, you have here manage identity providers or manage IP addresses, login access, password sharing. All of these have three options: non-block or high assurance. But the first one, reports and dashboard, has an extra one that is allowing or not the users to export or print it. And this one I put it here and highlighted because in the customers that I have been, I always get the same questions when they want to protect the access to their contacts and accounts. They say we have it in the system, but from reports, people are always being able to do that. So this is the setting that you need to control. So
that sounds like the kind of thing that's going to show up on the exam.
That's why I kind of highlighted, because it's something that is the only one, reports and dashboard, that has that additional option. All the other high assurance option allow you to either don't do it or block it so they cannot do it, or say only people with high assurance policy have access to it. So important thing to remember between high assurance and standard is that high assurance is to restrict your admins to a specific sensitive operations, like all the ones listed here. But just in your mind, just remember things that are really sensitive, that are security related, that are gonna protect your system, like manage login policies, manage IP addresses, all these ones in here. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much, because it's like a very dry topic to talk about. So.
Right. Paulina, about 2 more minutes, and then I want to make sure we have time for Brenda as well.
So perfect, because I am almost done. So you as an admin can always monitor how are all these user sessions, who is being logged, when they log, how they log it, if they log from what domain, etc. So under setup session management, that's why I put it here, you will see a view where you can see who has logged, what was the session ID, what type of session they have, etc. If it was a standard or not. But it's not only this, it's not gonna only allow that. You can make reports, you can do dashboards, etc. So these fields on the right side are the fields in the table that you can use to create either views or to do any type of analysis of how your people are using, logging into the system. So you can see here, you can see there from where they came, even, you know, from what postal code. There's a lot of settings here that you can see. So it's important that as an administrator, you monitor how the users are logging into your system. And finally, there are two things here, so I'm going to go quickly. There are persistent and non-persistent user sessions, and tons of them. But the persistents are the ones that when they log in, they keep there connected and allow the two system or the two user and the system to continue talking. And as you can see, some of them are logic, like, you know, if you have an API connection, then the connection keeps being persistent until you kind of finish that session, because, you know, it's needed for the interface. There are some that are temporary. There are many here, but they are only used when you are at particular points. Only, let's say here I was very clear when you are moving between, maybe switching between domains, and that session is not going to be persistent. When you switch, it's going to be only temporary, and then or when you are doing flows, let's say you have in your application, you have a flows, the session that is created in the flow is only temporary, it's not persistent. So I don't think you need to learn all of them by heart, but if you have questions around here in the exam, just remember that the persistents are the ones that you probably will need to keep the feature working or going. So if you are using an interface or OAuth or Visualforce pages, you remember those are going to be more persistent. If you are switching between domains always or using flows, those are the two keys for you to remember. Those are going to be the temporary sessions. And that's all I have to say. Is not very nice topic, but anyway, I tried to do it.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Thank you, Paulina.
Yeah, it's long, it's very long.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Brenda, on to you for show and tell.
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me? Hi.
Great.
Good. Okay, let me share. And thank you, Paulina, for going through all of that, because can you see my screen?
Yeah, it says you're presenting, but I don't see.
Oh, there. Present now.
And we were seeing it. It was just showing the Google Meeting thing back again. So I didn't know if you had a Salesforce tab open you were trying to share.
Now I'm at full screen. Annoying. Okay, perfect. So yeah, as Paulina mentioned, there is a lot of little checkbox settings in Salesforce. And so I also put together some slides. I'm not going to go through them with the session settings page and all of the different options and also definition of what they each do. In the documentation, there are, for some of them, some little like gotchas. And so I put them in the slides as fun fact of, hey, if you enable this or disable certain features, there can be some impact to users or performance, things like that. So I'm not going to go through all the slides, but I will show you the click path. So I'm within my dev org. And so most of the settings that Paulina went through are going to be in the session settings page. So you can go in here to your quick find, click session settings, and then you will see the big laundry list of all of the different checkboxes that you can enable or disable. Some of them, interestingly, are also in identity verification. And so I thought that was kind of interesting because it's not often that Salesforce puts the same things in two different places where you can enable or disable. And so like they've got them called out here, but a couple of these things are also found under the identity verification page. So again, this is where you can go to enable, disable all of these different features. So the session timeout, the default is 2 hours. So I think that's helpful to know. And like she said, you can reduce it down to 15 minutes, or you can go up to 24 hours. Another thing that I learned is that it doesn't evaluate from a timeout perspective until halfway through the session. And so if you've got it set to 30 minutes, Salesforce isn't going to really pay attention to it until it reaches 15 minutes through that 30-minute session, that it kind of checks it at the halfway point. So I thought that was interesting. Your session settings require secure connection. In my dev org, I really haven't checked any of these, and so the ones that are checked now are going to be your default. So that's to note. The extended use of IE11, I know I have had to annoyingly check that box for some clients who still use IE11. So there's that. Caching stuff here. I didn't know about this checkbox. Natalya, you mentioned it around when you're doing heavy config and lightning and wanting to see your changes quickly. I didn't know that, so that's super helpful to learn. Identity verification, the lightning login stuff. I know we talked about that earlier last week around whether or not you want to enable that. Clickback protection settings, cross-site forgery, content security. So yeah, there's a lot here. Down towards the bottom, this is where you can change the session security levels for some of this functionality. So if you want to make a delegated authentication or lightning login into the category of high assurance, this is where you can change some of those things and move them over into the high assurance bucket. But obviously you want to be careful doing that because presumably you've got your things requiring higher assurance. You want that extra level of security, and so you don't want to just make username and password into the high assurance bucket because that's less secure, and then you're going to be opening up yourself to potential issues. Logout page settings, and so if you want to create a custom page that your users would see when they log out, this is where you can kind of configure that here. And then the new user email, and so when you're credentialing new users and they get the welcome email and they'll to their security question, the default is that that link will expire in 7 days. But if you want to change that, it's funny, the options it gives you, it's 1 day, 7 days, or 6 months.
Wow.
So I think 7 days is probably a good one to just leave it as the default. Okay, so all your session settings are here. So then we can go over to identity verification. Paulina had this in some of her slides as well. But this is another place that you can go and set some of these same settings that are on the session settings page. You can also enable or disable them via identification. The identity verification page, and then the session setting security level policies is where you can also go to, like she said, state I wanted only certain users to be able to manage authentication providers. I can raise that session to high assurance, and so if in high assurance I have it stated as it requires 2-factor authentication, then only users who have logged in via 2-factor authentication will be able to make changes to these settings. Reports and dashboards is an interesting one. You can change it here. You can also change it if you go into the quick find and you go under access policies for reports and dashboards. You can also modify it here under access policies and whether or not you want to check the box that says it requires a high assurance session. Okay, some of the other things, and so she went through the network access. And so if you do have a need to kind of change or add your trusted IP ranges, you do it here. I evidently have a Chrome extension that puts this button here, which I don't think is a good idea. So I don't know why extension does that, but I wouldn't check that box. So if you need to manually add or make changes to any of the IP ranges that are stored, you can go in here and put in the range. And so I know this is something I've had to do in working with some third parties from a development perspective, is do a temporary come in, put in the IP range for those users. Putting a description is a good idea as well. And then when you no longer need that access to then remove it.
One very bad practice I saw was one org I worked with. They had their start and end range as 000 to 255, 255, 255. So basically they were assuming all IP addresses were trusted.
Everything was fine.
Yeah.
So that's not a good practice. So this is
very bad practice.
There's also, excuse me, there's also real quick, there's another version of this. So in this particular case, it's going to force a verification to get sent out. If you also put trusted IP ranges on profiles, then it's a hard lock and won't let them in.
Yep.
So you have to kind of decide whether you want to have them verify or whether you want to say you have to be on our network and you can't get in otherwise.
Yep, absolutely.
And Jeff, the profiles one overrides this one, right?
Correct.
Yep. And then the other things, so under session management, so this is where you can see kind of who's all logged in. And one thing to note is it will kind of the created and then the valid until will always kind of reflect based on that timeout window that you specify. And so since mine is the default, the 2 hours, then it's going to show me, so it's created at 4:47 a.m. and it's going to be valid until 6:47 a.m. And so again, this will always show your based on the logout time frame that is specified in settings. So again, not very exciting stuff, lots of little checkboxes, but that is kind of the good news is that if on the exam it asks, well, where do you enable or disable these things? Session settings is a good guess if you don't know, because there's a lot here.
It's great. I love test taking strategies. That's very awesome. All right. Thank you very much, Brenda, for that. I learned some new stuff today, so that's cool. I'm going to go ahead and close out the slides. So again, we are not meeting on Friday. It is Thanksgiving break. And so for next time, what do we got going? Just one thing to read, but there's some homework you get to do after reading it. So we're going to start getting into SAML, and there's a link that Gemma Emmett posted in the architect community, and it's a great article. So I posted that as the official study link for learning about SAML. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to SAML. If you haven't read that article yet, he basically uses the idea of a beer tent at a festival to describe how SAML works and how you have to go and get your wristband. And when you have your wristband, you can get your beer. So great article, take a look at it. And then this is the fun part, in your own words, describe what SAML is and what do the IDP and the SP, what do they do? How does the browser get involved? And next Wednesday, not Monday, but next Wednesday, we're really gonna focus a good chunk of the time to talking about SAML, making sure we all understand it. I'm gonna ask each of you to share your own version, your own explanation of how SAML works, because just, different people understand things in different ways, and it's always good to hear those different voices. And because SAML is so prevalent throughout everything on the exam, want to make sure we all have a really good grasp on it. And then the other to-dos before next Monday is catch up if you're behind on study topics. I personally am behind on study topics. Sleep in, eat good food, relax, spend time with your friends and family. If you're traveling, please travel safe. And then for Monday, Pavitra will do some review of session security for us. And then Clara and Satish will talk about AAA, authentication, authorization, accounting. Clara will explain what those things are, and Satish will give us some examples of each of those, because that is a specific call out in the study guide about given a scenario, explain, is this authentication, authorization, or accounting? It is 9 o'clock. If anybody has any comments, speak now. Otherwise, we're going to end and hopefully not run over time. And as always, I'll hang on the line till the last person drops. So have a great Wednesday. Hopefully you're not too busy. Enjoy your weekend, and we'll talk to all of you on Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good holiday.
Happy Thanksgiving, guys.